As you may have read, my name is Renato Almanzor, and what I love to share is that my full name is Dr. Renato Patrick Insiong Ilamangan Almanzor Jr. And it's fine if you call me Renato. And I share that with you because I bring all of who I am with me, just as it's my assumption that you bring all of who you are with you. And the theme for today is awakening voices of the heart. And in order to truly do that, we need to make sure that we bring all of ourselves into the space this morning together, right? So you're not asked to check any parts of yourself at the door. You're not asked to leave out your culture, your languages, your family, your position, your beliefs, your values, your languages, your hopes, your dreams, your hardships. I'm inviting you to bring all of that so that we can draw from that to be able to awaken the voices of our heart. So a lot of what I do is often drawing for that myself. So I often have the idea that I'm an expert on many things. But this morning, though, I'm going to facilitate the expertise that's in the room, right, to truly awaken the voices in the heart. And so I come to you, one, from Oakland. So I live in East Oakland. And so I thought it was a little bit of a rough drive. I'm a commuter wimp, just like I'm a weather wimp. I'm not good with hot or cold, and I'm not, I love that I get to just drive 5 minutes to my office, right? But then sometimes I have to go downtown, and to downtown Oakland, and that's like 20 or 30 minutes, and so I'm just struggling with life. But for the most part, I come to you from Oakland, where I've lived for over 20 years. For the longest time, I raised my son, who's now 21, as a single father, and I miss him dearly because he's been in the Philippines since April, actually, and now he's in Vietnam visiting his cousin. And last I heard, he said he's going to come back and hang out with me for Thanksgiving. So let's hope for that. And even before that, I moved around quite a bit because my dad was in the U.S. Navy for 22 years. He was a cook, and so we always had great food at home, whether he was making it or he brought it from his work. But even related to that, my mom, before she retired, worked 20 years at a hospital in the cafeteria, where she also served food, did the dishes, as well as delivered food to the patients. So we are always about the food. And through that, I realized that I've always wanted to change the world. So part of what I want to be able to tap into when we talk about awakening the voices of our heart is like, what is it that we've believed is the foundation of who we are? One of the things I believe is what we do emanates from who we are. So whatever you're doing in your job, in your career, in your hobbies, in your vocation, it emanates from who you are. And if you do those things well, it's really because that's who you are. And if you do some things not so well, it may be because that's not really who you are, right? So I played professor for a number of years, and one of the things I ask students is, do you study well? And if they say yes, then I said, oh, then you're a good student. Do you study poorly? Oh, then you're a bad student. That's who they are. And sometimes we work on changing those things that we do and don't really focus on how is it that we see ourselves. So part of what I'm going to do is offer some opportunities to be able to kind of tap into that. And I share that with you because, like I said, I've always wanted to change the world. So I went from going from a psychology major to a master's in counseling, thinking I could change the world one person at a time. And then I realized it's just taking way too long. And so I went and got a doctorate in organizational psychology, thinking I can change organizations at a time. And I'm still struggling with that because it's still taking me way too long. But I also realized that it's actually gotten back to one person at a time, starting with me. Right? So I need to be able to continue to think about what is it that I've left behind in my stories, and what are those stories that I actually need to just name, but not also be driven or guided just by the pain. Because when we talk about awakening the voices of our heart, we need to acknowledge that we've had a lot of triumphs and we've had some tribulations. Right? When I think about my own heart, I know my heart pitter-patters on a regular basis, and sometimes I'm just heartbroken and my heart aches. And there are some days where I would say love wins, and there are some days that I would say hurt wins. And what do we do with those stories? And for me, it's about holding on to those. So our time together will be about awareness, like what are those voices in our hearts? And then the second thing really is about acceptance. Like how do I hold on to those stories, to those voices, and not feel like I have to judge them as good or bad, simply as the voices that are in my heart. And then it's from there that I'll talk a little bit about action, right? So what do we do with that? Because what we do, again, emanates from who we are. So I'm going to go through some activities that are going to be quick, and part of it is because, and it'll feel quick, because I'm going fast. And some of this is because it'll build up to what I hope to do in the last conversation, which is what are the dimensions of authentic family, parent, community engagement towards social justice. My mission is to facilitate, integrate, and cultivate a love-based social justice agenda for community well-being. And I share that with you because I feel like I can do it wherever I go. I can do it in my work. I can do it in my family. I can do it in my community of men, community of Filipinos, community of Oakland, community of my county, the state of California, the country, the world. And some of that is by being the oldest of 4 boys in our family. I was the kuya. So if you know Filipino families, the kuya is the older brother, or sometimes the older cousin, who has a lot of roles and responsibilities and obligations for those who are younger. And I always entered every space thinking I was the oldest in the space. So I came in here thinking that you all were going to be my younger siblings and cousins, regardless of what ages we really are. But that's just what I do in the world. So when I take responsibility for stuff, it's like all of that, right? So I'm going to take some responsibility, but really, in some ways, this is your choice. This is your time. So I'm going to invite you to do some things, but I want you to gauge what is it that you want to do and not do. I do believe that to the extent that I can know, love, and understand myself is to the extent that I can know, love, and understand another. And similarly, to the extent that I can know, love, and understand another is only to the extent that I can know, love, and understand myself. So I'm going to give you opportunities to do both of those things. How do we get awareness of ourselves and another as a way to understand us? So there'll be small pockets of stories. My story connected to your story become our stories, and I think our stories are actually love stories. And so how do we accept those stories so that we can then move towards action? Any questions or comments about that? Curiosities? All right. So again, this one's going to be quick, and then I'm going to move us. So I'm going to do some threes, some big groups, some small group, and then pairs, and then table groups. So just kind of know, I'm one of the things that I appreciate Carla and Sudi kept saying along the way is, this isn't a keynote, this isn't a presentation, this isn't a training, you are a catalyst, conversation catalyst. And I said, well, you know what I do when I play that role is often I provide lovingly provocative questions. And so hopefully what I got is that you all are about that, otherwise you wouldn't have shown up because I saw some of the videos previously. But for now, I'm going to move us right into the next thing, or the activity, which is at your tables, I have this thing. I put all these things, and these are things you can take, and I can also make available. There are 4 versions of these. So I like to call them fortune tellers. Of course, when I showed them to my son, he said, that's a cootie catcher, right? And so, but for the purpose of this, what I'm going to ask you to do is just in 2s or 3s, just say, have one person share a value that's on the outside, right? Because the reason why I call this a fortune teller is that this is going to help you understand what is it that you need to talk about right now. Because it'll give you a prompt on what you need to talk about. So for example, on the outside of this one, it says care. So I simply go C-A-R-E. Then inside is like, how am I feeling now? One of the ways I'm feeling is curious. C-U-R-I-O-U-S. So luckily the words are spelled there, so you don't have to be a good speller. And the other thing that I would ask the person is, how else are you feeling? And for me, it's hopeful. So then underneath that tab, there's a question that asks, if you think about your personal mission statement, what words come to mind? What parts of your life connect you to that mission? Right, so I shared my personal mission, which is, again, to facilitate, integrate, and cultivate a love-based social justice agenda for community development. And I added love-based social justice because I used to be the Associate Dean of Students at UC Berkeley. And one of the things in my job description was protest management, if you can believe it. And what I learned there is that when people were about protesting, they were sometimes spewing what I felt were hateful words at other people. And to me, that's not social justice. It's not. So I had to characterize my social justice, say that it's love-based, just to be really clear that it's not going to include hate. Because I do believe, as Gandhi said, right, the end is inherent in the means. What I believe for the future, I need to act right now to get there, right? So that's a quick example of how you can do this. So in twos or threes, I'm just going to give you a few minutes where one person will take on the fortune teller. Another person, even if you go around, one chooses the value, two others choose the feelings inside, and on the second feeling, you answer the question, everybody really quickly. Questions on the task? So it's a little bit different than what's described up there, but I think you got it. So twos or threes, right? Twos or threes, and I'm only going to give you about 5 minutes total. Do me a favor and go ahead and thank your partner or partners in a way you feel most appropriate. I'm going to offer this, right? That in some ways, when we're interacting with others, we just don't know what to talk about. Or we have some other curiosities, but one of the beliefs I have is that there are sometimes things that we need to talk about. And sometimes those things are driven by our values, which are the example of the outside of this fortune teller, as well as how we feel right in this moment, which is the inside. And then based on our values and what we feel, often lead us to the kinds of questions that we might want to have conversations with in others, right? So that for me is in community. That's for me at work. That's for me in family, right? So how is it that we can draw from our values and our feelings in the moment? Because sometimes in this work, I realize in preparing for today, I have like 10 ideas that I wanted to do. And then I have a coach and a consultant who, that supports me, and they often say, less prep, more presence. Right? So I'm going to work on that and just know that I'm not going to be able to do all the activities that I might want to do, and at the same time, some things are going to feel quick. Right? But one of the things that I want to say is that whatever you did decide to share, in a lot of ways, they are parts of your life story. Right? In a lot of ways, your values were influenced by what you're experiencing in the world, what you decide to focus on, whether it's the people in front of you or the people behind us or next to us, right? And the feelings that emerge from that, and the choices we make to either be vulnerable, courageous, authentic, measured, however we want to be. And sometimes there are some questions that we might need to ask, right? So any quick reflections on this particular activity for you in terms of what you got from it?
I love the efficiency of it. I worked with a great therapist years ago. I described it like a brain surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
Like just go right in with a micro tool and like get the thing that you need to get.
Yeah.
You know, and so we immediately were getting to where at least in our case, like real intimacy
Yeah.
and authenticity and
Right.
vulnerability.
Yeah.
Without saying like, hey, how are you? I'm so and so, and
Right.
I don't care, and the weather is nice.
Yeah.
So let's get rid of all that.
Yeah.
It's great for the team.
Yeah. And it may be bringing all that into, right? So even in you answer these questions, those things are influencing it. Like I would say how I answered or how I entered today was definitely influenced by the weather. Right? But I don't need to tell you I'm now influenced by the weather, right? So it's how I might go, being giddy or being excited or being bundled up or keeping my jacket on, may be a demonstration of that, right? So thank you for that. Any other quick reflection? All right. So again, I will send there are 4 variations of this, but you can all go ahead and take some if you want as you go with you. That has how to print it out, how to cut it, how to fold it, or you can find a middle schooler to fold it for you, and then how to play with it, right? But again, there's just quite a number of variations. And I want to acknowledge Hope Lab and my friend Chris Murchison, who created this. He was responsible for an icebreaker for 4,000 people. And so they did a whole bunch of these for 4,000 people to do an icebreaker at the beginning of a conference. So again, it is an efficient thing that you might be able to do in any place. But what I want to do now is actually have you group yourselves. Because another way to provide some provocatively loving questions is to be able to say, how do I see myself and where might the connections be? And so one of the things I also got charged with, I felt like, from Carla and Suri was, can you get us to move around a little bit? And so yes, I'm going to ask you to move around, and at the same time, I'm going to give you some directions that might seem vague. And the reason why they might seem vague is because they will be ambiguous, right? And so part of this awakening the voice of the heart is being aware of, how am I? You know, what am I comfortable with? Am I comfortable with ambiguity, or do I need a lot of certainty? And how does that show up? Does it show up by controlling or by being flexible, right? And all that to do also to say without any judgment, right? So part of awareness of who I am and acceptance, I'm going to encourage you to do so with compassion, right? Because we've been influenced to be a certain way, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a sec. We've been influenced to be a certain way, and sometimes we need to get what the influences are with some grace, gratitude, and gravitas, and without judgment, right? Because I've been influenced by two very loving people in my life, for example, right? My mom and my dad. And my mom loved me so much that she raised me on a regular basis with a lot of shaming, right? And my dad, because he loved me, he wanted to be tough, he raised me with a lot of fear. They loved me deeply, right? They loved me deeply. So how do I not confuse that with some of the tools, if you will, that they chose that may not have been as effective, and it had some impact? So how do I accept that? How do I raise my awareness around that, right? So part of what we're going to do is just think a little bit about what are some of the things that influence the values and feelings that you had in that last activity, as well as start leading us into the kind of work that you do. So what I'd like you to do, again, it's going to be vague and ambiguous, and I'm going to ask you to do it quickly, is group yourself according to where you're from. And you're going to have 2 minutes to do it. So right now, so some of the groups are big and some of the groups are smaller, that's fine. What I'd like you to do within your group, do this quick conversation in pairs or threes. So like this group, all three of you. And what you're going to talk about is discuss how where you're from influences your values today. So however you defined it, where you're from, how does that influence your values today? Do that in pairs or threes because you're only going to have about 2 minutes. However you decided to do that, there isn't intended to be judgment, right? So because where we're from is dynamic, it's not static. But in some ways, one of the things I want to raise for you, though, is however you see yourself from where you're from, it does influence what you want to claim, right? And part of what you're also claiming is the values that you may have gotten from that, right? Again, at any point in your life, at any point in your life. So just to kind of name that, right? And I know there are other points in reflections, but I want to group you in my favorite grouping, right? And again, notice how it's a little ambiguous. You might need to go broader or more narrow. Ideally, you're not going to be alone in this grouping, right? So what I'd like you to do is group yourself according to the type of student you were in high school. Again, you may not have found your tribe quite yet, so wherever you are, that's fine. But one of the things I want to offer is a definition of leadership. And so for me, I think leadership is taking responsibility for what matters, right? And so what I'd like you to do, in pairs or threes again, because I'm only going to give you a couple minutes, is discuss how the type of student you were informs your leadership style today. How does the type of student you were inform your leadership style today? You have 2 minutes. Do this again in pairs or threes. Great. Again, something to think about, right? Because I would say there are eras in my life, right? So as I'm about to approach my 55th birthday in March, and I'm getting ready to figure out, there was a period of time where I was like all about Zumba, got my Zumba certification. There was another point in life when I was all about different spiritual groups and, did my retreats and all that kind of stuff. There's another time when I was hardcore social justice, hardcore Filipino, hardcore whatever, right? So there were definitely periods in my life that that was it, right? And I think that came from, same thing in high school. I was hardcore scholar athlete, right? So I wanted to be, but to the academics, I was considered a dumb jock. To the jock, I was considered a brain, right? So it's odd to be in those kinds of groups. So again, part of what this is to be able to start to reflect on what are the stories that we told and what are the stories we're telling now. And how is it that we can own it with acceptance, not judgment, right? With acceptance and not judgment. It's just what we are, right? Go ahead and notice the folks in your group, and go ahead, if you can, quickly just stand in a circle now. Stand in a big circle. And what I want to share is just this quote really quick, that so much of what we're talking about is who are you, right? So I'm going to take you through another activity again in a sec, but this quote from Brené Brown offers that owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerability is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. So whatever eras or epochs, right, or whatever parts of our lives, part of what I want to encourage you to think about is, what does it mean to own it and not run from it? What does it mean to own it and not run from it? Again, we're raising awareness and getting to the point of acceptance, not judgment, acceptance. So what I'd like you to do is notice who's in the group. Yeah, notice and be noticed. So go ahead, take a look around. Once you find your partner, go ahead and have a seat somewhere in the room. Once you find your partner, have a seat somewhere in the room. So in some ways, this is going to be a silent activity, and it's going to be a listening activity, right? So already, as I say that, what comes up for you? It's like, I'm more of a talker than a listener, right? Or even when I asked you to do that, did you really try to pay attention to vibes? Or did you wait for someone else's vibe to connect with you and just waited? Were you chosen or did you choose? Or was it there? And not any judgment, just kind of reflecting silently on how that was. Because what I would offer is that what you did emanates from who you are. How you did that says a little something about who you are, right? No judgment. What I'd like you to do now is silently decide between you and your partner who is partner A and who is partner B. Silently between you and your partner, who is A and who is B. All right, all the A's, raise your hand. Again, all right? So again, think about how you did that, right? Did you struggle to figure out how to silently do that? Did you volunteer your partner? Were you volunteered by your partner? Again, no judgment. What does that say about who you are? So A, what I'd like you to do is ask just this one question. And as you ask just this question, you're actively listening. B, I want to encourage you to answer to the degree you feel comfortable and maybe then some. And it's only going to be a minute, so it's not a lot of time. Answer to the degree you feel comfortable and then maybe then some. And then I would also encourage you to go beyond what might be obvious answers to this question, right? So A, you're actively listening, trying to create the space around your partner as you're listening. And you're asking for 1 minute, who are you? Right, if I can ask you a favor, go ahead and thank your partner in the way you feel most appropriate. I'd like to, just hear a couple of reflections. And let me also offer that what you actually got from your partner was her gift to you alone, not to the whole group, right? So you can share your reflections of your own experience and maybe some of what you shared, but you're not sharing your partner's stories, right? So any reflections or comments about this activity? Yeah, thanks for that. And again, my other offering is these aren't proprietary questions. Feel free to take them. Ask other people. I'm always telling folks, well, I'm not done telling you who I think you are, right? Or vice versa. I want to know more about what are you pretending, right? And if folks hang out with me, you'll know that this is sort of like my conversation. So I think sometimes that draws people to me. Sometimes that, pushes people away. And depending on who you are, I'll call it, I'm a researcher at heart. But honestly, research for me is licensed to be nosy. I'm just super duper nosy and curious about people, right? Why you are the way you are, right? Because again, it shows up in what we do, right? And I might say you do this because you're a jerk, but if I really get it, you're doing something because you've been harmed deeply by our society, just like me. Right? We've just chosen a little something different, right? And the other thing I want to offer is that I think, remember that in some ways, we start with having ideas about ourselves and other people, right? I'm influenced. I see myself according to my race, gender, age, sexual orientation, physical abilities, class, all these different things. And I have some ideas about what that means. I have some ideas about what it means for you, about me as well as for yourself, right? And some of those ideas cause some feelings. The ideas that I have cause some feelings. Either I like it or don't like it, right? So I saw who was going to be here, so I showed up. That's my action. Sometimes these ideas that we have about ourselves and each other are called stereotypes. Sometimes these feelings that we have are called prejudices, right? And sometimes these choices or actions, folks will call discrimination. What I want to offer is that part of our stories, accepting our stories, means copping to the idea that I have some ideas and feelings about me and you. And some of these lead to how I act, right? And I think part of that is some of these ideas don't even just come from you and me, right? So for the longest time, well, actually, take another quick look at who's in the room. Just notice and be noticed, right? And then look back at me. And I'm sure you see that that one cool thing that we have in common, right? We are all good looking. I don't know why that's so funny, but one of the things that I know growing up, I didn't have that idea that I was good looking, right? There was a period of time where I lived in Marin County, and I love Marin County now, right? But there was a time where I was one of 4 Filipinos at school, me and my 3 brothers, right? And beautiful then meant feathered hair, and my hair would not feather. And some of you don't even know what feathered hair is, right? Sometimes it meant having a pointed nose, and I remember trying to pitch my nose every night to make it more pointed, and it just would stay flat, right? And even beautiful then, in the 70s, it meant thin lips. I remember trying to hold my lips in thin, but I had braces that kept popping out, right? And then our family moved to a place called Vallejo. And if you know, Vallejo is like one of the most diverse cities, towns in the country, right? So I remember getting there thinking, damn, look at these folks. They got hair like I do, kinky. They got noses like I do, flat. They got lips like I do, thick. They look just like me. They're ugly too. And then I realized that there was something whacked about my standard of beauty. Because I realized then that, there are some people checking me out. And I was trying to check some people out who have these lips, right? And then I realized being Filipino, we need these lips, right? We need these lips. Where's Carla? Right? Where's City? We point with our lips. And you can tell how close or far something is according to how far out my lips go, right? And you're a good Filipino. One day, my dad brought over Krispy Kremes. So I live in Oakland, right? When they first came out, I said, Dad, where'd you get these Krispy Kremes? And all he did was, and I knew, being a good Filipino, that meant you go south on 880, you take the Alvarado Niles exit, you go 2 lights, and it's right next to the Jollibee, right? We need these lips to be able to give directions, talk about distance, right? And that's a standard of being. That's a standard of beauty, right? So part of the work is to accept, not judge, what is. What's my awareness of how I see myself? And to what extent do I need to work towards accepting that, right? What do I need to do to accept that without any judgment? Because there are going to be some things, again, that come from this world that I truly believe are glorious, and some things that are wretched. Right? There are some things that I'm going to move through life with ease and joy, and sometimes I'm suffering. And sometimes our work, because of the systems that we've created a surplus of suffering. Because we haven't created the habits, as Sudi kind of referred to as pausing and reflecting about the questions we might ask of another. To be ready to hear their answers, not my answers about them, their answers about them. So go ahead, go to your tables, and I'm going to end this in a couple minutes. Right. I wanted to share an important frame. And I want to also offer that I'm going to try to say this without sounding like I'm woulda, shoulda, coulda on myself. At the same time, I'm going to woulda, shoulda, coulda on myself. Right? Part of what I wanted to do is have greater conversations about these 3 sets of elements around the dimensions of engagement. right? So I want to share these questions. Again, this PowerPoint will be made available, as well as the Who Are You activity. I'll give you the facilitation guidelines to that if you ever want to do that with others. The family the rounds, diversity rounds thing that I did around that. There's some facilitation notes if you want to do that activity, as well as the fortune tellers guidelines. So, but what I want to share with you about what I believe you do, and honestly what I believe we do, right? So my work is about resident and youth engagement and leadership. So I think we're aligned in a lot of ways. And I do that in East Oakland. So I work with the school district, the county of Ed in Alameda, as well as the city council. I work with neighborhood groups. Tomorrow, what's beautiful, we're launching this process called the East Oakland Congress of Neighborhoods, where tomorrow we're bringing 1,200 East Oakland residents to create a people's agenda, right? Because part of what we know we need to do is provide opportunities to analyze, criticize, and mobilize towards the kinds of communities we want to have, right? So one of the things I want to share is that in your work and in our community building, I think these stories are just as important if we're thinking about the process. Like, what are we doing in our work where we're being inclusive? I know it's tiny. God, it's really tiny. I need to look. Okay. Which is talking about how will the work get done, how the work is designed and managed, and how the work is monitored and evaluated. Like, when we do what we do, to what extent are we paying attention to process? So today I was thinking about how inclusive am I being? I know in some ways this may have advantaged extroverts and disadvantaged introverts, right? And it may have advantaged talkers and disadvantaged the writers and the artists, right? Or the dancers. So I need to keep thinking about how it is that our processes are inclusive when we're talking about engagement and leadership. The other thing I think we need to think about is relationships. Like, how will the people experience each other? How equitably will we be involved and contribute? Like, how are we making sure that each person in this room can contribute to the conversation? Right? So you saw that everyone had to listen and everyone had to answer. You may not have answered as much, but you were contributing to the story making that led to awakening the voices in our heart. The blessings and gifts we received were the voices from our hearts that let us know how are we then experiencing each other. So I want to pose a question: how are you doing that in your community building, in your engagement work, whether with parents and families, based on your ideas, feelings, and actions that you have about them and yourself? And then the other thing that I want you to think about, what I think is a key dimension, are the results. What are you actually moving towards? What are you actually moving? What's our vision? You know, what do we actually think healthy and equitable community and family and leadership engagement looks like, feels like, smells like, tastes like? What's the quality of that, right? And again, part of the work is to be able to say these things have to be in relationship to each other. Oftentimes, and I do a lot of program evaluation work as well, we often look at the results and we don't look enough at the processes or the relationships. And I think for me, what's critical is that we need to understand the idea that process is about power. Right? So one of the ways I define power is a capability to satisfy the personal, relational, and collective needs. What is my capability to do that? To fulfill or obstruct meeting those needs. That's power. When we talk about relationships, I think we're talking about love. For me, Paul Tillich talks about how love is defined as finding unity in the separated. Right? The assumption is we are unified. But what we have is a culture and systems and structures that divide us. So how can we exercise love in finding unity in the separated? And then when we talk about results, I hope those results are about justice, about what's fair. I was just in a conversation last night with a whole bunch of resident leaders where we wanted to understand the difference between equality and equity, right? And recognizing it's not about treating everyone the same. We need to understand the historic injustices that's occurred. So a lot of my work is about spatial and racial justice. What's fair? And that means acknowledging the harm that's been done, the disinvestment that's been done, and sometimes that means to be equitable means Some folks need more resources because they have greater needs, right? And then what I also appreciate about this is I'm reminded of a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., right? Where he lifted up that sometimes people see power and love as polar opposites. And what he said instead was that power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So it's not enough just to say, are our processes clean, effective, or efficient? It's not enough just to say, are the relationships, are people liked? Can we check them off as showing up? It's not enough just to say, did we get this benchmark or this outcome? We need to deepen it and broaden it to say, are we talking about power? The capability to fulfill and obstruct personal, relational, and collective needs. Or are we talking about love, finding unity in the separated? Are we talking about justice, talking about fairness, in some ways reparations for the work, right? And so if there's anything that I hope is that part of the conversations that we had might lead you to think about what's at your foundation? What's at your foundation, right? I love this quote from Alice Walker. I think the foundation of everything in my life is wonder. Right? So some of the critical practices that lead you in your work, in your life, I assume come from some foundation. You know, so it's like, what motivates and animates you? What are you curious about and awe of? What place does reverence have in your life? What fascinates and inspires you? So if you were to complete this sentence, and I'm going to ask you to actually take a moment to complete the sentence, I think the foundation of my life is woo, 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 right? So go ahead, take a moment just to kind of choose what's at the foundation of your life. So let me offer this I found this on Etsy. There's a necklace company that, and I do this every year, where I choose a word for my year and I put it on a necklace and I just wear it. So it's called intent.com or something. Intent, you can find it on Etsy. And they'll put, you can make it a ring or a bracelet. I just make it a necklace. And sometimes I'll go around. So I'm a nerdy dork, right? So I have these vision board parties every December, and so I'll have a whole bunch of people, and then I'll find out, have them choose a word for the year, and then I'll gift them all this necklace, right? And so part of it is being able to know what's something that's guiding you. If it's your foundation, do you kind of bring it up on a regular, right? So for me, I actually don't have, it's two words, it's divine justice, right? So last year it was illumination, right? And the year before it was gravitas, right? So, and then also that's just the way that I need to kind of hold myself, right? But what I want to offer is that sometimes the foundation of who we are and what we do is about purpose, right? So I want to end by sharing a quick story about what I also think is my purpose, which comes from the dimensions, right? Is that my son's name is Mahal. And if you know Tagalog, Mahal means love, and it means expensive, and he's both, right? So you say, Mahal kita, I love you, right? So when Mahal was 4, he used to sit up really close to me. I say, Mahal, why are you sitting so close to me? And we'd say, because I love you, right? And we'd have dinner together, and I'd say, Mahal, why are you trying to give me all your vegetables, right? And he would say, because I love you, right? And then I would ask him, Mahal, why is your room such a mess, right? Because I love you, right? So if there's anything that you can get from our time, part of it is being able to be clear on what is your foundation? What is your purpose? And that's what's going to truly awaken the voice in our heart, right? And if you're not clear on your purpose yet, I'd encourage you to take it from Mahal and let your purpose be love. So thank you so much for letting me kick it with you this morning.